The Vietnam War. A conflict etched into the collective memory of a generation, a scar on the American psyche. For many, it's a confusing tapestry of jungle warfare, political turmoil, and a deeply divided nation. But beyond the iconic images and protest songs lies a complex question. Why did America, the most powerful military in the world, ultimately lose the Vietnam War? For many Americans, the Vietnam War remains a raw nerve, a deeply uncomfortable chapter in our nation's history. We often hear the simplified narrative. A small communist nation stood up to the mightiest military in the world and won. But won is a complex word here, especially when the other side isn't trying to win by traditional metrics. The truth is, America didn't lose Vietnam on any single battlefield. Our forces were never truly defeated in a conventional sense. Yet, by 1973, the last American combat troops had left, and 2 years later, Saigon fell. So, if we didn't lose a battle, how did we lose the war? That's the question we're going to unravel today, diving into the strategic blunders, the political quagmires, and the human cost that ultimately led to America's withdrawal. To understand why America lost, we first need to understand why we got involved. It began not as a war against Vietnam, but as a proxy war in the broader Cold War struggle against global communism. After World War II, France tried to reassert control over its colony, Indochina, but was met with fierce resistance from the Viet Minh, led by the nationalist and communist Ho Chi Minh. When the French were decisively defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, promising nationwide elections. Elections that, crucially, the US and the South Vietnamese government blocked, fearing Ho Chi Minh would win overwhelmingly. This decision laid the groundwork for disaster. America supported the creation of South Vietnam under Ngo Dinh Diem, a fiercely anti-communist but increasingly authoritarian leader. The US saw him as a bulwark against communism. Many Vietnamese saw him as a Western puppet, and his government alienated the very people it was supposed to represent. We essentially backed the wrong horse, perceiving a nationalist liberation movement through the singular, distorting lens of communist containment. This fundamental misunderstanding of the conflict's nature was perhaps America's first and most critical mistake. By the early 1960s, a communist insurgency, the Viet Cong, was growing rapidly in the South, supported by North Vietnam via the elaborate Ho Chi Minh Trail. President Kennedy sent advisors, but it was Lyndon B. Johnson who dramatically escalated direct American involvement. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, a murky series of naval engagements, provided the political pretext for Congress to pass the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, effectively giving Johnson a blank check to wage war. The U.S. strategy was one of attrition. Find, fix, and destroy the enemy, using overwhelming firepower. This meant massive bombing campaigns, aggressive search and destroy missions in the jungle, and body counts to measure progress. The military believed that if they killed enough Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army soldiers, the enemy would eventually give up. But this strategy failed to account for several critical factors. Firstly, the enemy wasn't fighting for territory. They were fighting for independence and national unity. Their resolve was far deeper than American policymakers understood. Secondly, the Viet Cong were masters of guerrilla warfare, blending into the civilian population, using tunnels and booby traps, and choosing when and where to fight. American conventional might was often useless against an invisible enemy. And thirdly, the US was propping up a corrupt and unpopular South Vietnamese government, making it nearly impossible to win the hearts and minds of the local populace, many of whom saw American soldiers as occupiers, not liberators. This created a cycle of violence that often alienated more people than it protected. By 1968, despite years of escalation and assurances from the government that victory was in sight, the illusion shattered. The Tet Offensive, launched by North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, was a massive coordinated attack on over 100 cities and towns across South Vietnam, including the US Embassy in Saigon. Militarily, it was a devastating defeat for the Viet Cong, who suffered immense casualties. But psychologically and politically, it was a catastrophic defeat for the United States. Americans at home fed a diet of optimism by their leaders, watched in horror as the war came live into their living rooms. If the enemy was supposedly on its last legs, how could they launch such a widespread and powerful offensive? Journalists like Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, began openly questioning the war. Public opinion swung dramatically against the war. The credibility gap between what the government was saying and what was actually happening became a chasm. The home front fractured. Anti-war protests grew larger and more militant, dividing families and communities. The draft became a symbol of inequality, sending disproportionate numbers of poor and minority Americans to fight. Soldiers returning home often faced not parades, but scorn or indifference. The idea of a unified national purpose, so vital for a protracted war, had evaporated. Richard Nixon was elected in 1968 on a promise to achieve peace with honor. His strategy was Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing U.S. troops while training and equipping the South Vietnamese Army, ARVN, to take over the fighting. But even as troops left, Nixon secretly expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail, further escalating conflict and outrage. Atrocities like the My Lai massacre, where unarmed Vietnamese civilians were killed by American soldiers, revealed the moral corrosion that can occur in a brutal, confusing guerrilla war. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, exposed decades of government deception regarding the war's origins and prospects. Public trust plummeted to an all-time low. Finally, in January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. The U.S. agreed to withdraw all combat troops, and North Vietnam agreed to a ceasefire and the return of POWs. Crucially, the agreement allowed North Vietnamese troops to remain in the South. For many, it felt less like peace with honor and more like an exit strategy with concessions. Without American air power and logistical support, the ARVN, despite years of training, was ultimately outmatched. In 1975, North Vietnam launched a final offensive. The South Vietnamese government collapsed swiftly, and on April 30th, 1975, Saigon fell to communist forces, uniting Vietnam under communist rule. The image of helicopters evacuating Americans and desperate Vietnamese from the roof of the U.S. Embassy became the enduring symbol of America's final, ignominious exit. So, why did America lose the Vietnam War? It wasn't because our soldiers weren't brave or capable. They fought with incredible courage in an impossible situation. The loss wasn't a battlefield defeat, but a failure of strategy, politics, and understanding. 1. Misunderstanding the enemy. We fought a Cold War proxy war against a nationalist movement with deep historical roots and an unwavering will to unify their country, regardless of cost. 2. Unpopular South Vietnamese government. The U.S. propped up a corrupt and authoritarian regime that lacked popular support, making it impossible to truly win hearts and minds. 3. Guerrilla warfare. Our conventional military might was largely ineffective against a skilled guerrilla force that melted into the civilian population. 4. The home front. Public opinion, fueled by media coverage and a growing credibility gap, turned decisively against the war, eroding political will and unity. 5. Limited objectives. Unlike World War II, America never had a clear, achievable objective beyond stopping communism. We weren't trying to conquer North Vietnam, just prevent its victory, a stalemate that was unsustainable, both militarily and politically. The Vietnam War cost over 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese lives. It fractured American society, eroded trust in government, and left an indelible scar on a generation. It forced America to confront its limitations, question its moral authority, and ultimately to learn difficult lessons about intervention, geopolitics, and the true meaning of winning a war. While the debates continue, one thing is clear: Vietnam fundamentally reshaped America's understanding of its place in the world, a legacy we continue to grapple with today. While the war ended in military defeat for the United States, its lessons continue to shape our understanding of conflict, nationalism, and the complex interplay between military might and political will. The quagmire of Vietnam remains a powerful reminder that victory is not solely determined by firepower, but by the hearts and minds of the people, both at home and on the battlefield. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most challenging conflicts. What are your thoughts on why America lost the war? What lessons do you think we should carry forward from this period? Share your insights in the comments below. If you found this historical deep dive valuable, please like this video, subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of history's pivotal moments. Thank you for watching.